вашем распоряжении. Готов.
Welcome to the future of Battlezone mapmaking. In the latest iteration of the Battlezone map editor, it is now possible to sculpt terrain, paint it, and place objects precisely and efficiently with many new possibilities added to the mix. In the past, the only real way to create and edit a map for Battlezone was to use the built-in editor, which was amazing for its time, but it hasn't aged very well. It has many workflow problems, such as being only able to smooth one vertex at a time. You can only place one tile at a time. You can only use corners and caps if you're willing to manually place them and align them, one at a time. You can only delete, move, or create one object at a time. And the height adjustment tools are limited, imprecise, and just clumsy to use. I could go on, but the point is, we have better tools now. With a little help from the Battlezone community, I've engineered a Blender add-on called BZMapIO, which massively improves upon what was previously available. Now we have multi-select editing, terrain sculpting, and a new terrain painting workflow with auto-placement of diagonals and caps, as well as access to many of Blender's advanced features should you choose to utilize them. With all that explained, let's dive right into installing the tool, then I'll briefly go over the general workflow and functions of BZMapIO. You'll need to install Blender, which is a fully featured and free general-purpose 3D program. You can get that at blender.org. You'll also need my plugin file to install into Blender. Both of these things are linked in the description of this video. Just be sure to unzip the BZMapIO file somewhere that you can get to easily. Now, in this demonstration, I'm going to assume that you have enough knowledge about Blender to do simple things like navigate the viewport and load files, but I will at least show you how to install an add-on and point out things that you'll probably want to know about. To install BZMapIO into Blender, click Edit, Preferences, select Add-ons, then click Install. Navigate to where you unpacked the BZMapIO zip file and select the .py file. Then enable it. You will now have access to a tab labeled BZMap in your sidebar. The second component of the add-on is a scene file which comes bundled with it called bzmapio.blend. When working on any Battlezone maps, we need to be using this template as a starting point. At least as of this video, you still need to generate your map from maketrn like you normally would, so I'll just load in a freshly generated HG2 file. Note that your map must be square for this plugin to be able to work on it. Note that you have the option to disable loading information from the BZN file. The BZN file contains all of the information about all of the objects which exist in your map. I'll also import the map's textures. We don't have to choose a file to do this because it just looks for the .mat file in the same directory as the HG2 file. Be aware that this can take somewhere between 7 seconds to 3 minutes depending on the size of your map. While working on a map, I typically find it's convenient to also have the map opened within the game too. This makes it easier to check buildable areas and whether or not the game's AI will have trouble traversing through your newly created environment. These buttons take you to different workspaces. Let's go over sculpting and modeling tools first. These buttons are toggles, by the way. Pressing them a second time will take you back to object editing mode. I'll just quickly make some changes to the terrain near the map editor player spawn, represented by this cube. After pressing the export button and letting it process, we can actually reload the map in the game and immediately see those changes in effect. You'll generally want to play with the sculpting tools to figure out what they are all useful for. You can get some really quick mountains with draw, quickly smooth things out, and level out areas to a specific height with the flatten brush. There's a lot of really good stuff here. Note that each of these tools are configurable through the Tool tab, so if you don't like how a brush is behaving or want to use a different stencil or whatever, you can tweak it here. All of the tools listed here operate relative to some kind of selection. These are likely going to confuse most users, so let me demonstrate how they are meant to be used. There's a number of shrink wrapping tools, which mainly serve as a means to conform your terrain to objects in some way. If I add an icosphere, scale it way up, and then press Selected Object Shrink Wrap, our terrain is going to conform to this shape as the object is moved, rotated, scaled, or edited. If you know your way around modifiers, it'll work with those too. Invert Shrink Wrap is a toggle for shrink wrap objects. You can use objects to carve into your terrain this way. This button bakes your shrink wrap object, which means that the object gets deleted, but its influence remains an integrated part of your terrain. Having shrink wrap objects present has performance implications, and it can interfere with sculpting and exporting, so when you are done with a shrink wrap operation, it is generally a good idea to bake it into the terrain. Paint Shrink Wrap allows you to create a shrink wrap object which is an exact copy of the terrain that you paint over. All paint selections in the add-on currently use the weight painting interface, so you can paint a mask for an area by having the weight value set to 1 and using the brush, and erase areas by setting the value to 0. I also included the button to clear all painting done. Anyway, after painting what you want, press the Paint Shrink Wrap button and you can move, rotate, and scale the copy of the terrain wherever you want. Or you could even just invert the effect and flatten it instead. Let's touch on object placement. Whenever you do object editing of any sort, you'll want to make it a habit to make sure that the selectability of the terrain is toggled off so that you don't accidentally mess it up. For most multiplayer competitive maps, you're generally only concerned with scrap, geysers, and spawn points, which can be placed by dragging and dropping any desired object. You are free to move around, duplicate, and delete stuff as you please. All of Blender's transformation tools are at your disposal here. If for any reason that you would like for an object to not conform to the terrain as it's moved around, you can look into its constraints properties and apply the shrink wrap. This deletes the constraint, but leaves the object in place, allowing for free movement. You can even place buildings in midair or partially under the ground in this way, but know that land deformation effects of the Day Wrecker or Thumper might angle snap them back into place in-game. If you're making a map which needs respawning items, you'll probably want to use the Cell Set Respawning button. This does as its name implies, using the respawn time entered here. The tool can be used to update the respawn time too. And don't worry about the duplicates or sequence numbers, that stuff is handled automatically on export. Lastly, you have limited access to a bunch of properties related to the object from within the Object Data Properties tab. It's not very user-friendly at the moment, but if you want to do simple things like change the team number of a unit or modify its hull and ammo, you can do that here. With that out of the way, let's wrap up coverage on the terrain shaping tools. BZMapIO will always operate in increments of 1280 by 1280 meters. Maps must be square, and the maximum size a map can be is 5120 by 5120. So when you click the map size up or down buttons, it will not only scale your entire map to the next increment, but it will also automatically scale any object placement along with it. Do note that you will still need to retexture your map should you choose to resize it, and that if the mat file differs from your current terrain size, you'll be given the option to replace it with a properly sized blank one. Reposition Map just provides you a convenient way to move, rotate, and scale your entire terrain. It operates as a toggle, most useful if you find that your map is too big or too small, but you don't want to go a full size up or down. Now we need to talk about the texture painting tools. After importing the map's textures, you are shown a representation of the tile set which the map uses in the 3D viewport. These are tile selector objects and are structured to specifically work with these 3 buttons here. So I'll pick a solid, a diagonal, and a cap. Going into paint mode, draw whatever you want and then hit apply. If only solids are enabled, it will process the painting operation very quickly. Diagonals and caps take a fair bit more time to process in comparison, but it will automatically figure out their placement for you, thus greatly improving the transition between tiles. My recommendation here is to draft out your map using solid tiles initially, then when finalizing the look, you do a quality pass with corners and caps in place. When exporting your textures, you have the option to randomize the orientation of all solid tiles. But in order to see the effect of this, you'll need to re-import your map and its textures after doing so. Alright, that's about it for the overview. I can't promise the editor will be perfect and error-free. I mean, it is Blender after all. Save early and save often. Back up your work regularly. There are a number of features, though, that I would like to eventually implement, such as direct custom texture and object support, visualization of the map's environment parameters, and other nice-to-haves. Be sure to check out the official Battlezone strategy Discord for all the latest news and discussions. I hope you enjoy BZMapIO and the modern conveniences it brings to an old game. Don't thank me, just make some cool maps with it, and that'll be enough for me. Cheers.